In these stories, when you hear this cuckoo, turn the page. This story is called Pedro Pepper. Pedro Pepper sat by his little fire and shivered. He not only shivered, he also looked extremely miserable. A huge shawl was draped around his shoulders, and there was a hot cup of cocoa beside him. But he could not get warm. Pedro had only been living in the garden for 3 months. He had always wanted to visit Britain, so being the adventurous type, he had travelled from Mexico all by himself on a huge boat. When he had arrived in the garden, it was warm and sunny. Now Pedro could not understand why it had become so cold. The sky was grey, and everything looked so bleak and bare. "Where have the bees and butterflies gone?" thought Pedro. "And why don't the birds sing anymore?" A large tear ran down his face. He went over to the window. Perhaps he might see some of his friends in the garden. But, oh dear me, something very strange had happened to the glass. It had a beautiful feathery pattern all over it, and he certainly couldn't see out. He was more and more puzzled. Again Pedro shivered, and taking his big shawl and a hot water bottle, he crept up to bed. "I shall never be really warm again," he thought sadly. He was soon fast asleep, and as he slept, he dreamed of the hot Mexican sunshine and the jolly friends he had left behind. It was late when he awoke, and he could hear squeals and laughter in the garden. He hurried over to the window. Pedro rubbed the glass and was very surprised to find that the feathery pattern melted away under his hand. His fingers were wet and cold as he peered through the clear patch. What a sight met his eyes! "I must be dreaming," he thought. Falling from the sky were millions and millions of white feathers, floating gently downwards, covering the houses, the trees, and the earth. Everything everywhere was dazzling white. Suddenly a sunbeam shone through a cloud, and everything sparkled. "How beautiful!" thought Pedro. Quite suddenly, he'd forgotten the cold. All the garden gang were out there, shouting and laughing. Some were throwing the feathers around. Others were sliding or pulling each other along on strange contraptions. Many of the younger garden gang were building peculiar white men with funny hats. Alice Apple was the first to miss Pedro. As you know, she was always laughing and singing, and because Pedro was usually so cheerful and jolly, she had become one of his best friends. She looked towards his house and saw him looking through the window. She waved to him and asked him to come out. Poor Pedro! He shook his head and looked quite scared. "Please come out!" they all cried together. "We're having such great fun!" "Oh, I couldn't possibly come out there," shouted Pedro. "It's much too cold. Besides, all those feathers will only make me sneeze." How they all roared with laughter. "These aren't feathers, it's snow!" they shouted. "And the pattern on your window is called frost. The best way to stop shivering is to come out and play." So Pedro put on a warm scarf and gloves, and went out to play. And do you know, for the first time that winter, he found that he was really warm. When the music stops, turn the cassette over